You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome on into another McGuire Monday here on Toronto Sports Rush. I'm Julie Stewart-Binks, joined by Pierre McGuire. And Pierre, can you tell us where you are in this secret location that you seem to be in right now?
I'm in downtown Toronto, Julie, right near King Street, not far from Front Street, getting ready for the Hockey Hall of Fame selection committee meetings will take place later today on Monday and then most of the day on Tuesday. So this is one of my favorite times of the year. You know, the Stanley Cup has been presented. Obviously, congratulations to the Florida Panthers. And we've got so many different high-quality candidates to consider for admission into the Hall of Fame for this great class that we'll have.
Wow, that's so exciting to be a part of that. And I won't ask you anything about, details into that whole process because I know it's assumingly very locked down, but we will be excited to see who, or is it, I assume it is.
Oh, it's very secretive. You sign a non-disclosure form when you become a member of the committee. It's something that I cherish. This is my 7th year on the committee, going into the 8 years. After this, I've been given a 3-year extension, so that's good. You have up to 15 years to be on the committee, so I'm well past the halfway point now, but I've cherished every single opportunity to be part of this. And the people that are on, if there are only 18 people on the entire committee, it's pretty special. And you sit in that selection room and you hear all the opinions, and it's pretty neat. It's really neat.
Oh, that's actually got to be like every hockey player, hockey fan's dream, is to just be in the room, be a part of that, hear the debates, and it feels very cloak and dagger. So I'm proud that you're a part of that. That's a really incredible opportunity for you to have, and I know that your input and insight is definitely appreciated in that group. And I wanted to point out that you said congratulations to the Florida Panthers for winning the Stanley Cup, because that is a tradition that has always happened, especially at the draft. However, I noticed last year, no one congratulated the Florida Panthers. I remembered this because I made a TikTok about it afterward. And I felt that was surprising. Maybe it was just like a trend because like the first couple of teams didn't do it. So then everyone else was like, okay, I guess we aren't doing it. Do you remember that?
I do, actually. I wasn't impressed by it either, to be totally honest with you. I think it's really important to always acknowledge the people that have won. It's such an amazingly difficult trophy to win. I was fortunate enough to be around it twice as a winner, and I appreciate every single day and every single person that was part of that. So I'll never look down on it. I respect the people that have had the opportunity to win it and do win it. So I'll always acknowledge them. I think that's really important. That's why the one thing I agree with Paul Maurice on a lot of his stances and a lot of his ideology. I did not agree with him when he told Rod Brindamore, I don't think the coaches should be shaking hands. Because when you drop game plans to beat other players, I think it's important to acknowledge how hard those players had to play against you, even though your team may have won. I think it's important to acknowledge those players and show respect to those players.
Right, that too. And then also to acknowledge like the whole coaching staff, I feel, as being a part of like that team and coming up with everything, and it kind of just gives everyone an opportunity to, that they're a part of it as well. That was my mindset. I thought, oh, this kind of takes away also opportunities from the rest of the coaching staff to live this dream moment in a lot of those ways. But I'm glad at least when they did win the Stanley Cup, everyone went out there and did their thing. So let's get into some of the bigger topics of the day. This is a huge week, a huge sort of 10 days for hockey, because we have the draft coming up at the end of the week starting on Friday. And then we also have free agency beginning on July 1st. So let's start with Toronto, where Pierre is, where our show is appropriately named. And why don't we start with maybe the biggest name that's on the docket, and that is Mitch Marner, who, of course, lots of speculation as to what's going to happen next. He's said he wants to take meetings on July 1st, around July 1st, probably virtually. However, a lot of teams want to be able to know what their strategy is for the draft, for free agency, I'm sure, ahead of when maybe Marner wants to have these conversations. How do you feel? What do you make of sort of like the push and pull of maybe when Marner wants to talk to teams and when teams need to know what his decision is or if they're going to include him?
I got to think that maybe Mitchell's not having those conversations, Julie, but I have to think his representatives are engaged with other teams at some point to measure interest, to measure the type of vision they have for how they're going to utilize Mitchell as a player, the types of players they would play with him. Like if I were Mitch Marner, the number one thing I'd want to know is who's going to be my center iceman? How do you envision how the power play is going to be run? Do you think I'm going to be part of the penalty kill? Because you're a vastly underrated penalty killer. What do you think your organizational deficiencies are? And if you think they're X, Y, and Z, how are you going to address them? I think there's certain questions. Maybe Mitch doesn't have to ask them, but his representatives have to ask them so that they can present to him a position paper of this is a team that fits what you're looking for. This is a team that doesn't fit what you're looking for. These guys may have more money to give you, but they're not going to have enough money to give to other people. So you got to measure all that stuff out. I've been part of these things over the years, and it's far more complicated science than what people think. And so I don't know if Mitchell's having those conversations, but his representatives better be having those types of conversations.
Right. And those are all incredibly important questions for Mitch to know, for the teams to know. Do they want to try to get this done before the draft? Because, trades go down or things happen. People are trying to figure out their team. Like, do they want to get that done or at least know an idea before heading into free agency?
I think the answer is yes. And I think you're raising a very big issue because it's not so much about who you're going to draft. It's about how you're going to utilize your assets going forward. Do you need to dispense of maybe 1 or 2 draft picks to get a player you thought Mitch Marner could be, but Mitch isn't coming to you? So if Mitch might be coming to you, you don't move those picks. You utilize those picks judiciously, but you utilize those picks. So, I think you're touching on a really important point, Julie. The other part of it is budgetarily, nobody truly knows exactly where the cap is going to be. So you kind of have to kind of understand where everything is right now in terms of what it's going to cost you in terms of term, no pun intended, and in terms of dollar value. So, again, it's a complicated business, but I would say there have probably been some discussions behind the scenes. The player's not involved. I would say the representatives are involved.
Okay, so overall, we know there's a few different teams that are interested in him, or at least that have been reportedly interested in him. Where do you feel he maybe would either best fit or a team that would most likely try to sign him?
Vegas, I think, would be one team. I wouldn't be surprised to see Anaheim get very involved in this. Dr. Samueli has already said that they're prepared, especially after hiring Joel Quenneville, they're prepared to go out and spend a lot of money. In fact, spend right to the cap to become a very competitive team. And here's the one thing that I would just say. Patrick Kane was a first-round pick of the Chicago Blackhawks out of the London Knights organization. Mitchell Marner, even though he shoots a different way than Patrick Kane, has been compared favorably over time to the way Patrick Kane has played. I wonder if that's not appealing or enticing enough for a player like Marner to say he did amazing things with Kane. They won 3 Stanley Cups. There's some brilliant young players that are starting with Leo Carlsson. We talk about the importance of center icemen. Mason McTavish. You look at the center ice depth, Ryan Strome. You look at the center ice depth in Anaheim. It's really good. Maybe he says, I fit there. And they have Joel Quenneville now. And they got really good young defense filtering through their organization. Maybe that's a place where I can go. So I think it's going to be out west. I don't think it's going to be – I know people have talked about Tampa. I think some people have even talked about Carolina. I get that. Good. I think it's great. The more the merrier. But if you really are serious about wanting to win and giving them the best opportunity, if you leave Toronto and Austin Matthews in particular, I'd be looking at Vegas with Jack Eichel, and I'd be looking at Anaheim with Joel Quenneville and that plethora of center icemen down the middle.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about Anaheim as a place for him recently, but now an older veteran, but a very good penalty killer and also good on the power play, but Chris Kreider being there as well, which is just wild to even say that Chris Kreider is part of the Anaheim Ducks. And then Jacob Trouba on the back end. It's sort of the new, John Gibson, whatever sort of ends up happening with what they end up doing. But they have gone from like being a rebuilding team and kind of taking things slowly to then like, all right, we've been rebuilding long enough. Like we got to get some big pieces in here and start trying to get back into the playoffs again because they've been out for so long. Okay, so is there a world where, you mentioned term, is there a world where Toronto offers maybe shorter term sort of bridge deal, maybe to match like a Matthews or something, like 4 years, so he's 32 at the end?
Could be. I don't see why it couldn't be. I'm never going to discount anything. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I think that they've got a real good situation in Toronto. I am more bullish on their team than maybe some of their fans are. I know they were disappointed, obviously, losing in 7 games to Florida, especially when they were up 2-0 in the series and 3-1 in game number 3 halfway through the game. I get it. I understand the disappointment. The truth of the matter is Toronto's a good team. They still are. Now, you lose a 100-point-plus scorer like Mitchell, that's going to hurt you. But I do think they can find a way to overcome that a little bit. I don't think they'll ever overcome the loss of that player. But I do think there's some other things, and Brad Treliving talked about it, the DNA has to change a bit. I would love to see Mitch stay in Toronto. I just don't know if he will.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Yeah, so would I do too, because also just in seeing how Florida did going forward, I mean, they made mincemeat out of the Carolina Hurricanes, and then, of course, they go to 6 games with Edmonton, but the Stanley Cup winning final game it was so over before it was over. And it just, that kind of felt like game 7 maybe against Toronto, but Toronto even got to a game 7. And, they lost their goalie in game 3 and they were up in that game, as you mentioned. And I couldn't help but think about the Leafs in the Stanley Cup final, just because, sliding doors moment, it could have been potentially the Leafs in that situation, but also how many changes and how much pressure the Leafs have to withstand in that market. And they were really, really close when you actually look at it and how close their team is. And as we mentioned, with Stolarz being out and all these different things. But I digress. Mitch Marner, if he was to, let's say Mitch Marner is to go, how much more pivotal is it to try to sign John Tavares, or is it not?
I think, especially with the way the center ice free agency situation is in the league right now, I think it'd probably be pretty important to get John Tavares signed, especially if you lost Mitchell Marner. Now, from what I read, and it's only what I read, I haven't heard this from anybody internally, the negotiations have not gone as easily as I thought they may have. I thought John was prepared to give maybe a little bit of a discount to stay in Toronto. It doesn't seem like that right now, but that doesn't mean cooler heads can't prevail in this whole negotiation. But I think if they lose Mitchell, they got to make sure they have more insulation down the middle for Austin. And I don't think you're going to get that in free agency this year. And I don't think they have the ability right now internally to replace a John Tavares. You look at their roster down in the American Hockey League. I don't think any of those guys are John Tavares. And I don't think Easton Cowan replaces Mitchell Marner. And so they've already traded Fraser Minton away. So the answer is, I don't think they have the answer if you want to know the truth.
Yeah.
So it's important if Mitchell does leave to get John signed.
Right. And we know that John would like to stay and, likely finish out his career there. And maybe it's a 3-year deal. So in a way, does he lack leverage, or does he actually have it? If Mitchell Marner, I say Mitchell, because you say Mitchell, I've taken on you, rubbing off on me. If Mitch Marner it just sounds weird when I say Mitchell Marner. If Mitch Marner was to stay, or to go, then it feels as though John Tavares has a leverage. But at this moment, it feels like he doesn't, because everyone knows he wants to stay. I don't know what you take of that.
No, I like what you're saying, because I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the Tavares camp probably has more leverage knowing that Marner's leaving. They know, because they know internally what the team has and doesn't have. And so I think that's a great point. But the truth of the matter is, Marner's going to have many options. I think John Tavares is going to have many options if he gets there to market. But I still think Toronto's a really good team. And they'll have to figure, look, if those two guys move on, they'll find replacements. Will they be as good? Probably not, but they'll find replacements. Yeah,
lots to watch and think about in thinking perhaps maybe John Tavares might get a similar offer deal as like a Brock Nelson type of thing. Just, I mean, not to be exactly the same guy, kind of like a former Islander in a way, but just in terms of how it's structured, the 3 years, maybe 7.5 seems like a lot, but hey, you pay for what the market is also dictating out there. And if a lot of people want a centerman like John Tavares, then he will be able to get that. Okay, so let's move on to Florida, where I got to ask you first and foremost, you know, you've been on Stanley Cup winning teams. You've been around the winning teams in the moments. What do you make of how Florida celebrated their cup or continues to celebrate it?
I thought the first day was good. I've been part of that too. You know, it's fun. You have a ton of fun with it, especially for some of the guys like that have won it for the first time. They're not too many. Most of those guys are repeat, but to win is pretty special. To do it back to back is unbelievable. I thought after the first day it got a little excessive. When I won, social media didn't exist. You know, cell phones with cameras didn't exist. So it's a little bit different. And I get it. Everybody wants their Instagram moment or whatever it is, whatever it's called. But I think that it's been a little overblown now. Okay, you won the cup. We all know you won the cup. Be the great team that everybody knows you are. You don't have to be rubbing it in people's faces. You just move along. And that's the one thing. But I don't understand the social media content part of it. They know it much better than I. But I was really excited for them. Now I think it's time to move on.
Yeah, and I think their bodies would say, like, it's time to move on, too. I heard Elliot Friedman saying, you know, hopefully Sam Reinhart dries out before, training camp starts, really, because these guys have just been going so hard at it, and they did it last year as well, too. But with Brad Marchand, obviously a great story, I'd say, even as someone who's from Toronto, who's seen him break a lot of hearts of Toronto fans. I have grown to really respect him and what he's gone through in his career, and winning the cup in 2011, and then, you know, being captain of the Bruins, being traded and fitting in on the third line with the Florida Panthers, and really being a role player, really just almost, it's like the perfect situation of a trade deadline acquisition is someone like him coming in and instantly being a part of that DNA and helping out and encouraging that type of DNA. With Brad Marchand, I mean, he's living his best life. He's looking at probably a 3-year deal right now. Do you think this is contingent on a couple other guys, but just in a vacuum right now, do you think that he would like to stay in South Florida?
I do. Just the relationship you can see that he's built with, whether it's Sam Bennett, whether it's Sammy Reinhart, whether it's Barkov, whether it's Anton Lundell and Luostarinen. You look at the relationships that he's built and how popular he became, not just with the players, but with the fan base there. It's a pretty hard place to look past. You know, you got a legitimate chance to compete for the cup next year. I'm not saying to win it, but to compete for the cup, which is really important for every player to go through. They're stable in goal. Their American Hockey League team is down 3-2 right now in the American Hockey League playoffs. Charlotte versus Abbotsford. Abbotsford's up 3-2, but they've got probably 4 or 5 big-time prospects down in Charlotte. I've been watching their team a lot down there in Charlotte. So you put it together, Florida's going to be good for a long time. And if you're Brad, you know Father Time's not on your side. You want to win more than you lose. And this might be his best opportunity to win. But if he doesn't go back there, he's probably going to have 5 or 6 legitimate places that are really good that will want him. Really good.
Right. And one of those places is Toronto. How likely do you see him being a Leaf?
Yep. Well, it'd be an unbelievable turn of events, I'll tell you that. But he would fit. He's proven he can fit in anywhere. If he could fit in with the Florida Panthers the way he did, especially with the vitriol that was built up over 2 previous seasons of playoffs, I got to believe he could fit in with Toronto without a problem.
Mm-hmm. And with Toronto fans remembering that he is Canadian and he was part of the Four Nations win this year, and who knows if he's able to crack that Olympic roster. I'd say that'd be very difficult, but you never know. Stranger things have happened. Okay, so we know that Sam Bennett, a very interesting situation here. Obviously the Conn Smythe winner, but went on stage wherever they were partying afterward and said that he I ain't leaving, as quoted in Wolf of Wall Street. And a lot of people had said that maybe not to take that as seriously as he has said, because also we don't know term, we don't know the money, any of that kind of stuff, and they're clearly inebriated at that point. What do you think of the Sam Bennett situation, and where that goes? Like, do you believe him when he says, I ain't leaving?
Yeah, I think he's staying in Florida. I felt that way going into the playoffs. Even if they didn't win, I felt that he was going to stay there. You get to a point as a player where you recognize the talent that's around you, the role that's been created for you, the way the coaching staff believes in you. You've got a built-in life in South Florida. It's pretty comfortable there. You got amazing ownership there led by Vinny Viola and his family. You've got, you get treated amazingly well down there. And they built this magnificent practice facility. Like, it's a hard place to want to leave. And that's why you see the emotion in Aaron Ekblad, who's been there 11 years. He's not in a rush to leave. I guarantee you, if they present him with a contract and he thinks it's a little bit fair, he's probably going to take it. And I think Sam Bennett, they know his market value. They might not give him pure market value, but they're not going to give him much below. I think he's staying in Florida.
Yes. So to jump off of that point, obviously Bill Zito was asked after the cup was won and he's on the ice. There's a lot of emotions. Like, do you want to keep all these guys? He said yes. And that's, what to take from that in that moment is, you can say what you want, say what you will, but do you believe now, Brad Marchand, Sam Bennett, Aaron Ekblad, what is the world in which all three of those guys stay? And how likely is it?
Well, I don't want to put a number on how likely it is. I think Bennett's staying. I think Marchand's staying, and I think there's an opportunity for Ekblad to stay. I think Bennett gets close to market value. I think Marchand probably gives a little bit back financially. I think if Ekblad stays, he gives pretty substantial amount back. For all three to stay, it's probably unlikely. I won't say highly unlikely, but I do think that if Ekblad stays, he's the one I'm most concerned about leaving. If he stays, it's because he's given back a fair number of dollars.
Do you think that because he's a right-handed shot defenseman, that increases his market value significantly? And the fact that he came back after the whole PED situation and had an incredible playoffs, like that his value has gone up, in which he may not take such a discount?
He won't take a discount if he goes somewhere else. If he goes and leaves Florida, he's going to get paid what he's worth. If he stays in Florida, he's going to have to give a discount. Here's the one thing. I don't know how much people have talked about in different markets. If you watch that entire tape and break down all the games, and people are saying, well, McDavid didn't do this, McDavid didn't do that. Part of why McDavid didn't do what everybody expected him to do was because Aaron Ekblad and Gustav Forsling shut the door on him consistently. Forsling can really skate. Ekblad's got amazing range and physicality. Both those guys were great as a tandem. I coached a defense winning a Stanley Cup. I know how important Ulf Samuelsson was to our team. I know how important Kjell Samuelsson was to our team. I know how important Gordy Roberts was to our team. And on a team that had players like Paul Coffey and Larry Murphy, really good offensive players, those other guys aren't big names, but man, oh man, did they make a difference physicality-wise and defensive-wise. And that's why Ekblad's got major value if he goes to market. Major value.
Yeah, you bring up a great point there in the fact of how and why Connor McDavid wasn't able to be the McJesus that we'd all talked about, is the fact that you got to remember there's guys on the other side that are very good at being able to do their job, and they did it very well. Even though sometimes McDavid would get close, those guys were there to shut him down. So let's go right on into Connor McDavid, set to become a UFA in a year, and everyone's wondering, does he stay in Edmonton? And especially after the comments that he made after they lost the cup, trying the same thing over and over again, just banging our heads against the wall. McDavid doesn't really say a lot normally that's tipping his hand, other than, of course, the video that we saw of him losing his mind about dig in. Where do you see McDavid feeling out where he might want to go? And what is the biggest attraction for him somewhere?
The biggest attraction for him is going to a team that's got a legitimate chance to win the cup. I think he still got that in Edmonton. One thing that's really important that nobody's talked about, his former agent is his president of hockey operations. They chose Stan Bowman because he has a 3 Stanley Cup winning pedigree as to be the general manager. The coach of the team is a coach that he had in junior, the Erie Otters, Chris Knobloch. So the internal mechanisms that have been built up around Connor McDavid, good portions of that are probably because that's what McDavid wanted. So you got to think about that. The relationship he has with Leon Draisaitl is exceptional. The relationship he had with Zach Hyman is exceptional. I got to believe the relationship he has with Darnell Nurse is pretty exceptional as well. So what do they need to fix in Edmonton? They need to fix the goaltending. They can say whatever they want, spin control it any way you want. I'm just telling you not to be mean. I think I have so much respect for Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard. Huge respect. But those guys aren't going to be starting goalies on a Stanley Cup winning team. They're going to be on a team. They can, but they're not going to be the starters. So they need to address that, number one. Number two, they're not good enough on defense. And not just with their defense. Their team defense isn't good enough. And the third thing is not nearly enough depth scoring. They've got to fix that. And I'll use an example. Look at the value of A.J. Greer, Tomas Nosek, and Jonah Gadjevich. Look at the value of Lusterinen, Marchand, and Lundell. Those 6 players destroyed the bottom 6 players for the Edmonton Oilers. Offensively, defensively, and physically. They destroyed those guys. So they need 3 simple things. They do. They need to fix their goaltending, they need to get more depth on defense, and they need to fix their bottom 6 forwards.
Yeah, very good points, all of which need to happen. So if McDavid is sort of driving the bus in a lot of the ways of how this team is being constructed and where they're going, if the Edmonton Oilers were to address these situations right now, these different issues, where do you think, what goaltender could potentially be out there, or maybe a trade is involved that you think would fit this team? Just off the top of your head, not holding you to it, but who do you think would be a great pickup for them?
Jeremy Swayman from Boston, if he became available. He signed a long-term deal. I don't think the Bruins were happy with the way the deal was done. I don't think they were happy with the fact that he sat out of training camp. I know they weren't happy with the way he played last year. They missed the playoffs. He was a big reason why, because the start of the year was terrible, and he was part of that when they had their roster that had made the playoffs the year before. So I would look at, I'm not saying he's available, but if you're asking me a guy that I would go after, because I think there's a vulnerability there, I'd go after him. Because I think he's a really good goalie, and I think he's a competitive guy, and I think he wants to prove people wrong. And, the Bruins and Edmonton over time have this unbelievable history of making deals. They've made a lot of trades between those 2 teams for a lot of years. So I could see maybe where something like that happens. But the market's not great. If you're looking for a goalie this year, the market's not great.
So do you think that happens before the start of the season? Because, the way the season ended and how big of an issue that was, does it feel as though it would be a real sort of sour note to start your trying to get back to the Stanley Cup with maybe the issue that you had, which was not having a goaltender? So you think you'd have one?
Yeah, I think it's something that needs to be addressed this summer, because you need energy and enthusiasm. You've just had back-to-back years where you've gone to the Stanley Cup final and you lost. One of the series you lost in 7 games, where you're down 3-0 in the series. And one you lost in 6 games if you're Edmonton, and chances are you could have been swept if you really want to be truthful. There was a really good opportunity for Florida to sweep them. So the 6 games was more flattering to Edmonton, which doesn't really matter much in the scheme of things. But here's the one cautionary note for Edmonton. You are in a rough neighborhood now. Calgary is getting better. Everybody knows it, and they're well coached. You look at San Jose. I know they're not going to be a playoff team next year, but they're getting better, so they're going to take points from you. Seattle's gone out and been very aggressive in the trade market, and they brought in a new coach. They're going to be aggressive. LA is LA, and they're going to be good, and Anaheim is going to be vastly, vastly, vastly improved. Nobody's talking about Utah. Utah has unbelievably deep pockets at the ownership level. They've got more than enough cap room. They've got an invigorated fan base, and they got a fun place to play. So they can go out and shop for free agents. I'm just telling you, Edmonton's in a really rough neighborhood. I haven't even talked about Vegas or Minnesota or St. Louis or any of those teams.
I know.
Winnipeg.
It's
I'm
really
just telling
good. They've
you,
got a lot of strength in the
they're in
West
a
over
rough
there.
neighborhood. Yeah, they're in a rough neighborhood, so they better not let their guard down or the window's going to close really fast on them.
Mm-hmm. And as we've been reminded of time and time again, that first series this year could have gone the other way if things hadn't turned around for the Edmonton Oilers, as the LA Kings were very difficult to get past, and a very good team as well, as you mentioned. So in terms of, I'll wrap this up shortly, but you mentioned Utah and them having some cap space and a place to play and interesting. There's another team too. So I'm thinking of Utah and I'm thinking of the Rangers that both have significant cap space. If you were to kind of like look around the league or just think of guys that might fit in either one of those places, again, two very different teams, two very different cities, organizations. Who do you think might end up in some of these places?
I don't know, because the free agent pool's not great this year. That's part of the problem. So I think most of this stuff is probably going to be through trade rather than through free agency. It's going to be interesting to watch the Rangers. You know, we've already, and you correctly said, Julie, think about Chris Kreider leaving New York after his first 13 years in the league. We're with the Rangers, and he was a very important Ranger, a very critical Ranger. He's in Anaheim now. You know, what happens with Keandre Miller? Lots of rumors around him. What happens with Alexis Lafreniere? Does Mika Zibanejad waive his no trade? I mean, I know Mike Sullivan flew over to Sweden to go visit with Mika Zibanejad as soon as he got the coaching job with the Rangers. There's a lot of stuff going on right now with the Rangers. It's going to be really interesting. They're going to be the team that could really cause a lot of different stuff around the National Hockey League if they go out and make deals or sign free agents. You talked about cap space available in different markets. Don't forget, Boston's got a wealth of cap space. They want to be a relevant player in free agency. The problem is there's not a ton of great free agents this year. So that's going to be interesting because they're all going to be fighting one another for these players. So it's going to drive the cost of doing business up. It's going to be really interesting to watch, especially Boston and New York. Those are two teams that choose to dislike each other. They've always disliked each other.
Yeah, and we know that the league is always better when those teams are better and into it. And of course, we missed them both in the playoffs this year. So then if there aren't necessarily that many free agents, how much action do you expect to happen in and around the draft this week?
A lot. We've already seen some, and there's a lot of chatter out there. So I expect a lot of deals. And it won't be for draft picks, maybe draft picks leaving one market to another, but I think you're going to see real live fire NHL players moving from city to city. And the one other thing I think we're going to see going forward, general managers or people that negotiated contracts used to throw no movement deals or no trade deals out there like they were candy. They just thought, let's just use that as an enticer. It doesn't cost us any money. We keep the player. And then they found out, well, maybe it does cost you money if the player's not as good as you thought he was going to be because you're paying a player probably too much money for what he can actually provide. I think you're going to see a trend happen where those things start to go away and players are going to look for more term, longer term, and I think we've already seen that, and less dollar value. You look at the Matt Duchene deal. You look at the deal in Edmonton with Connor Brown potentially. All these deals are like 4-year deals. So guys are going for term for less money. And I think that's an interesting thing to watch as we go into this shopping season.
Right. And just last question. You mentioned the no move clauses. This is also the time where teams can buy out players that have no move clauses, and the window's open. Means you're not put on waivers, but you can buy out players. Do you see any buyouts potentially happening?
I do. It's going to be interesting. We already had one, I think. TJ Brody got bought out by the Chicago Blackhawks. But I think we're going to see more as we go along here. But the thing I think, again, trends are starting to evolve, even though a lot of people speculate the cap's going up. I think one of the trends to watch for is players taking more term, less dollars. And I think another trend is fewer no moves and no trade clauses, and maybe players taking more term again on that rather than higher money.
Interesting. Okay. Very, very insightful things to think about this week, Pierre. We really appreciate your insight and analysis. It'll be an exciting week to watch ahead of the draft, which is happening on Friday, June 27th. And then, of course, free agency beginning on Tuesday, July 1st. Thank you so much for joining us, Pierre, and good luck with the Hockey Hall of Fame committee selections. We will be excited to see what you guys decide on and when that is unveiled. And we hope you have a great deliberation with your peers today.
You are an awesome teammate, and I love being on with you. Thanks a lot, Julie. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.